final product has turned out to be very impressive, especially in terms of representing the best of what social science research can do. Jeff's taken a very compelling and interesting puzzle that's the political scientists have been working on for decades. Basically, why young people don't turn out to vote. And this is certainly not a new puzzle, but it's one that we've been working on for a long time. And he's been able, through some careful data analysis of his own, to offer some new perspectives about why that's the case, and to put it into the context of the millennial generation today. What he has to say about this offers some new insight. It's truly original research, and it reflects the work of a very impressive young man. I think we have great things to expect from Jeff over the coming years. So, with that, I want to turn things over to Jeff to discuss his research. What we'll do is he'll give an overview of this for about half an hour, 45 minutes. Then we'll turn some things over to general questions and answers. So, Jeff?
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. Before I get started, I'd just like to take a moment and thank Dr. Kra for all the work he's done over the past year working with me. I mean, we probably started this just about a year ago. I came in and I said, so I've got this data set I'm kind of interested in working with, and I'd like to see what I can do with it, and kind of worked over the summer with some tossing ideas around, and then got into some of the data analysis last fall, and then this spring finally wrote the thing. So, you know, he's kind of helped me through each step of that, and so thanks to him. As Professor Kra said, my project today deals with a very specific problem, and that's the problem of youth political participation. The graph right here is taken from U.S. Census data from November 2004, so our last presidential election. And as you can see, the 18 to 24 age group voted in significantly lower numbers, and also was registered in significantly lower numbers than any of the other age brackets that are eligible to vote in this country. And this, for me, as a college freshman in November 2004, was really disappointing. That, you know, being on a college campus, there was this real sense that that, you know, young people were engaged. They were motivated to take control and change things, and, you know, change the direction of their country, and they never materialized. And it was, to me, it was a big letdown. But of course, this problem didn't start in November 2004. It's been going on for decades now, to the point that this has become a significant question in social science in general, of why young people haven't been voting, and why they've been voting less and less over, you know, as the years have gone on. And there's a number of different explanations in social science that have, you know, and different approaches to addressing this problem. I wound up focusing on two specifically. The first was political socialization, which kind of had its heyday more in the 70s and 80s, but it's still very significant today. And basically, the approach of political socialization is attempting to figure out how people develop an understanding of their political world, what factors play into that. Specifically, this is during the research focuses on during childhood and adolescence, since that's when a lot of our worldviews are kind of shaped. So that's useful in terms of looking at those youth voting numbers. You know, what's happening right before that? What's leading up to those years where you're eligible to vote? You know, what's shaping your political world and how you see it. The second major area is political communications. In terms of, and I guess this is more in terms of focusing on a specific factor for study in terms of what's influencing us. This is, you know, the way in which political messages and opinions are communicated, whether it be from person to person, man on the street, or through mass media campaigns. You know, this is an approach that takes into account how those messages are being transmitted and how we process them. So essentially, what I did with my project here is to try to develop an understanding of how these two interact and figure out how that plays into solving this puzzle of political participation. So to give a brief outline of what we're going to talk about today, the first section will be a literature review and theory section, which I talk about some of the previous research that's been done in these fields and how it contributed to the development of my own theories about political participation and communications. The second part will be research and analysis, in which I will present some original research data that I developed using a data set from the longitudinal study of American youth, which I've been working with for about a year now. And then kind of an analysis of that data and what it means, in particular pertaining back to my theory. And finally try to parse out some of those results and what exactly they might mean and what implications they might hold for this current generation of voters. So to begin with literature and theory, I've kind of touched on a couple of the key points. I mean, there were probably, I think, 21 sources in my final paper. I won't go through all of those. But I will go through some of the key points in political socialization and mass media influence over the years, and then try to bring that all together into what I'm terming the impersonal political influence theory. So to begin with political socialization, kind of the cornerstone of political socialization as a discipline is a piece by Peter Berger and Thomas Lakin, a book published in 1966 called The Social Construction of Reality. The phrase social construction is something that's thrown about pretty readily in the social sciences these days. I've heard it as a punchline in jokes in James Madison. But this was where it kind of first made its heyday, and and basically what we're talking about here is examination of all the factors that come into developing our opinions and our view of the world. And Berger and Lakin kind of break this down into there being, elements that construct our reality that are very objective and tangible, they're very factual, that we kind of can see them, feel them right there, and then more subjective things that are open to interpretation and more abstract to us. And obviously everything contains elements of both, but this is kind of the primary distinction they make, and it'll come into play later on in developing my theory. From there I looked at a book by Berman and I, it's called Participation in America. This is a major study in American democratic participation. A lot of it, however, focuses on participation as an output rather than, as an input into the larger political process rather than as an output. It might help while I'm talking about all this, by the way, to kind of think of this almost as like a factory, where these influences that Berger and Lakin are talking about are kind of the raw materials going in. The individual that interprets them is kind of the factory manufacturing them, and then the output being participatory action. So this kind of focuses more on what happens to participation afterwards and how it affects that larger political process. But they do talk a little bit about what happens beforehand. Most importantly, establishing kind of this idea that different people have what they term different political orientations that they're shaped by their influences, and then in turn shape the character of their political participation. So this is kind of the important middle step. This is kind of that important middle step, these political orientations, and it's a phrase that you'll see come up time and time again in here. So from here, you kind of have to look at all of this and what it might look like all put together as kind of a beginning-to-end path for political socialization as a process. And the best example I found of this was in a 1982 article by Paul Beck and M. Kent Jennings called Pathways to Participation, in which they kind of established through survey research, much like the research I